Welcome to the Levi Lyle podcast. Today's show is going to be a resource for communities, intended both for city councils throughout rural Iowa and citizens who are interested in developing their leadership and creative thinking about revitalizing our communities. Today I have Josh Larabee here with me from the Fairfield, Iowa Economic Development Association. Good morning, Josh. How are you?
Good morning, Levi. I'm well, thank you. How are you?
Great. Thanks for being here. I'm super excited about the message that we have to get information to people in rural communities about funding projects in their communities and bringing along the economic development of their rural communities. I was recently really ignited on this topic because my community here near Keota, Iowa is a small town of about 1,000 people, and we have come into a time period where we have to decide whether to continue our local town pool. Well, these can be very expensive projects for a small community, and people came together and found sources of funding to come up with a $1.5 million necessary to do a pool project. And in organizing that, now it's as though we have the pieces in place to be able to go do more of those kinds of things. And the realization that once a community is organized, it makes it much easier to go do that again and again is really cool. And that led me to you, Josh, and I want to hear a little bit about what you do at Fairfield and what's going on there with community development.
Well, thanks, Levi, and congratulations on that $1.5 million grant for the pool project. That's amazing for a small town, especially of 1,000 people. So congratulations.
Thanks. Yeah, that's a lot of volunteering, is what goes into those ways of getting organized. It's all volunteers when it comes to those projects around here.
Wonderful. So I have the opportunity to be the executive director for Fairfield Economic Development Association. We're a business membership organization, and the businesses that invest in us, and I like to call it an investment, even though we're a nonprofit, they invest in the growth of our community. They know if one tide rises, so do the others. So it's really an exciting space to work in economic development. I often say our job is to push the envelope, so to speak, and specifically in the area of growth. So it's always exciting to work in the area of growth. A lot of my friends and family say, well, Josh, that sounds good, but what is it that you actually do? And then we all chuckle. I would say if there was two buckets or areas that we worked in for economic development, our job is to take a look at what are the economic opportunities in our community that we should be taking advantage of and working on, and what are some of the economic hurdles. So those if I really had to simplify it into two buckets, that is what economic development is. Underneath there's a million things that we could go into, and that is really usually determined by a community of what those focuses should be.
Mm-hmm. Well, one of the things that happened when COVID came about was we realized how valuable our rural communities are. It's like those of us who live in rural communities always knew what our communities have to offer in our schools and the safety and all the relationship components that add to quality of life. But COVID really emphasized what it is that is nice about a small community, and that we can, in some ways, continue to gather in ways that in the big cities were more at risk because of the close, proximity everybody's in those big cities. And now we learned through COVID that people are seeking to be more mobile and can work in some huge corporate industry, but reside hundreds of miles from the main office, out in a small community where they could raise their family and enjoy all the luxuries that come with a close-knit rural community. And in that, it's an opportunity to say, hey, the time is now. Let's make it so our community is an appealing place for people seeking to get further away from Chicago or Minneapolis or St. Louis, and draw people in to what it is we have to offer.
Absolutely. In addition to your community, we noticed that here in Fairfield, and especially our realtors in town started seeing a spike, an increase in phone calls from large metropolitan communities inquiring about homes here in the area because they wanted to relocate. And like you said, where workplaces are more flexible than ever. So we're experiencing that here in Fairfield and Jefferson County also, with folks looking to come to an area that has room to breathe, so to speak.
Mm-hmm. I'm glad you mentioned housing. I think that is what we will dive into first. Today I see what we're going to talk about really as a trifold, maybe housing and then childcare, because when we were embarking on our pool project, one of the big oppositions was that there are other important projects that need to happen in our community. And so then we all had to kind of wrestle with, well, childcare is really important. Why are we working on a pool project when we don't have the whole childcare thing figured out in our community yet? Childcare is the biggest reason people name in a survey for taking their kids elsewhere out of our school district because we don't have childcare. But then the quality of life things related to parks and trails is the third aspect that we'll get into today. But maybe we could start with housing, and you could tell me a little bit more about some of the programs that exist in the community that you're aware of for helping people with housing, both the private citizens and the more overarching umbrella for developers coming in and putting up or investing in the community. Great.
Yeah, there's a lot of exciting things happening in Southeast Iowa, and we are working to keep up. There's a lot of people that would like to relocate here that are in search for housing. I think we have more people right now looking to move here than we have available housing. So that makes my job exciting and gives a good challenge. One of the programs for homeowners who are current homeowners or planning on buying a home is a program called the Regional Housing Trust Fund. And it's for a 6-county area here in Southeast Iowa. It's administered by an organization called Area 15 Regional Planning. But really the core of the program is to help folks fix up their home. And in many cases, it assists people who may not be able to go to their local financial institution and get a loan to do that. So the Regional Housing Trust Fund program is a loan program, and it is income-based, and so the terms of the loan are based on income. But in many cases, it is best serving the fixed folks who are on a fixed or lower income, and it's a great opportunity for folks to fix up their home, especially in emergency situations or in core pieces of their home, such as the foundation or the roof or the windows, things that are really provide integrity to the home. So it's a really exciting program, and it's intended to be a complement to what banks are able to do or credit unions where folks might have their mortgage. But it's a really wonderful program that helps a lot of people in our 6-county region.
Mm-hmm. How do you get word out to community members about that?
Well, thank you for this opportunity on this podcast. This is a wonderful way. Honestly, the program is under marketed, but the program is really homed with really good people in your community, and each of the economic developers in our 6-county region are the marketing arms for this program. So it's word of mouth. Our county supervisors in the region also get the word out about the program, but folks like you on this podcast here are helping us get the word out also. A really good place for information, it's not the only place, is our website, growfairfield.com. We have a housing tab, and it lays out the program on a high level, and then has our contact information if you'd like to talk about the program a little bit more to see if you qualify.
Mm-hmm. Cool. Josh, I'm going to be posting this to a YouTube channel where I can include links to those kinds of resources. So in the description, I'll have a link to the Regional Housing Trust Fund so people can learn more.
Wonderful. And I think one of the really important points to make for that program, especially for folks who are maybe on a fixed income or in a lower tier of income, the Regional Housing Trust Fund program, in some cases, and of course there's different qualifying factors, even though it is a loan, there's sometimes no payments due for the term as a loan. And that might sound a little odd. The borrowed money would still be a lien on the home, but let's say somebody is on a fixed income and they need a new roof, and it's $12,000. You could borrow up to $12,000, and no payments might be due, and that for folks who might not be able to make those payments, and then the balance would be due at the time the home would be transferred or sold. So that is really helpful to folks who may be in a situation where they don't have additional means to make that monthly payment.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, wonderful. Well, what are some other opportunities to assist homeowners?
Wonderful. Another program is for Southeast Iowa is a first-time home buyers program, and actually it's been quite successful this year. We're seeing a spike in the participation in this program, but it's a loan program where you can borrow up to 10% of the home's value, or $10,000, and it's an assistance program to help with your down payment. And so it partners well with your mortgage that you would be pursuing. It's low interest, and the terms are up to 10 years. So it's a really great program, and we're working to replenish that fund continually. Right now, it's been so successful. I think there may be room for one more loan, but again, it's a really great program that we're working to replenish.
Mm-hmm. So this is an Iowa program also, and there would be a state of Iowa website where where an application could be found for this program.
Correct. That would be with Area 15 Regional Planning. Now, this program does expand a little bit in terms of who's able to apply. So there's a 10-county area for this particular program, which is nice to have that expanded.
Mm-hmm. Is it possible that in a given year, if there are funds that run out, then it would roll over to a new year or a waiting list or something like that? Or what kind of a thing is this in terms of funds running out or something like that?
Yeah, so this particular program at this time is set up as a revolving loan fund. So it's the concept of there's a certain amount of money, we lend it out, and then as folks make their monthly payments, the fund is replenished, and then at a certain point we can loan out those funds again. So it's a revolving loan fund, and right now Area 15 is looking to see how we can expand that program even more, especially since we've seen a spike in interest and participation. So it's a revolving loan fund is how it's set up right now.
All right. So there's two things we've talked about. One is fixing up homes. Another is being a first-time home buyer. Now, what if a person comes in the community or has a lot in the community they want to build on? Is there something that they could get assistance or a program for helping them do a new build?
Yeah, and new construction, right, can be really complex. It can be really exciting. But there's a really great program that is just a few years old in the state of Iowa. So this covers the full state. It does involve community partnership for folks who would like to build a new home. But it is called Homes for Iowa. It's a great program, and like I said, it's just a few years old. And what it is a partnership with Iowa Prison Industries. So this is a really great program where the low-risk offenders who are incarcerated at the Newton Correctional Facility get the opportunity to learn skills to build a home. And essentially what has turned out is really wonderful 1,200 square foot ranch homes with probably mid-level finishes. And there's an opportunity for folks to buy these homes and have them delivered to a lot that they own. And the purchase price is around $90,000 for the home itself. And when it arrives, you have to have the foundation ready and your lot ready. So there is some additional work to do, but it's really nice to see these going up in Southeast Iowa. We have one here in Fairfield. That was a very successful project. And actually our local Habitat for Humanity organization purchased one. They are open to anybody, but they're really wonderful homes. There are a few things to keep in mind. So the $90,000 home is the purchase price at this time for the home itself, but overall development costs will range based on where you are in the state. But a good budget is probably somewhere between $130,000 and $175,000 is probably a good range that will get you a 3-bedroom, 2-bath home on a lot in your community. So they're really a great opportunity to take a look at.
Homes for Iowa is the name of that?
Correct. Yep.
Well, man, it is a tough time. I have some family in the industries of construction and also someone in lumberyard business. And the price of lumber has doubled or something like this. And it's a game changer when it comes to making that life decision to build a new home. So that's really interesting that Homes for Iowa could kind of fill that place of helping people build an affordable home.
Absolutely, and it's actually so successful. So many communities are taking the opportunity and taking a look at these homes. At this current time, it's almost a little bit over a year of delivery time. So they are working incredibly fast at Homes for Iowa and building these homes, and they're expanding the program. But the demand has been great, and the installations have been successful. So yeah, if you are interested, definitely check this out as soon as possible. And if it was about a year delivery time, that would give you a wonderful opportunity to get your site ready.
Mm-hmm. All right, a link will be in the description. Well, so what about the challenge of bringing builders into a real community? Somebody that would maybe put up an apartment complex or a cul-de-sac of houses. How do we approach that?
Yes, builders are in high demand, and I think it might be safe to say every community in Iowa is in need of housing, especially what we call workforce housing, which is housing that meets the price point of the average wage of the community. So not custom-built homes and maybe not, say, subsidized housing, but kind of that middle-of-the-road affordable housing, which changes a little bit within each community. So there's definitely developers and builders are in high demand, and so communities need to be as progressive as they can be, and aggressive, I think, especially when we're talking to county supervisors and city council members who are really at the helm of making the community attractive for builders and developers to come to and consider speccing homes. So there's a couple of tools out there cities and counties in the state of Iowa can help builders with and developers. You know, one of the easiest ones, I think, for city council, cities and counties to take a look at is creating a property tax abatement policy. And this is just really lowering the barrier to entry for developers to come in and for folks to, spec a home themselves or build a home for themselves. Mm-hmm. You know, cities can legally abate property taxes for new construction. This is something the state of Iowa allows municipalities to do, and there are some limitations on how much is allowed in terms of time and amount of property taxes. But a community can really work within those within the limits of the state. So, for example, here in Fairfield, the city of Fairfield has adopted a couple of tax abatement programs, and one of them is for multifamily development. So, if somebody was to build a new multifamily residential unit, let's say it was a 3-plex or a 4-plex or a 20-plex, whatever it may be, 3 units or more, that developer, for example, would receive at this time 100% property tax abatement on the improvements. So they would still own the base property tax on the base ground that they bought, which is usually quite reasonable. But on the improvements itself, they could get the property taxes abated, the new property taxes they created, for up to 10 years, 100%. Here in Fairfield, we're really looking to be aggressive in that area. We need a lot of housing, and this is the maximum the state will allow a municipality to abate property taxes for a multifamily unit. So, again, it's for the improvements. It's not taking away from any of the current property taxes being paid. This is really intended to be an incentive for folks to either fix up their property or create new housing, some new construction.
So recently I was talking to somebody in the community of Kielda who built a house, and they were able to do a tax abatement on the house that they built in town. So this was probably the program you're talking about, right? They said that they were able to find the one-page application on our website in our community, the city council's website. But I hear you describing this also as a developer that might build, a duplex or something like that also. So it's kind of this this program that could fit either a single homeowner building or a developer. Correct.
Yep. And we're in Southeast Iowa. We're in Iowa. The demand for housing is high. So I think as small towns, we really need to be looking at the lens of being competitive, right? We are all hungry and want more people to move to our communities and use the wonderful resources we have and experience the quality of life that we have. But at the end of the day, we really need to be looking through the lens of being competitive when it comes to developing our communities, creating ordinances and creating a culture. And in this case, creating competitive incentives for people to either build their own home and expand that tax base, or, for developers to come to our community. So that's how I like to look at it, and how we're looking at it here in Jefferson County and Fairfield.
Okay, cool. Well, Josh, another resource that I think complements this tax abatement program you just mentioned came to me from Chris Bowers at Area 15. He gave me a link to Federal Home Loan Bank, and that affordable housing program sounds similar to what you've described with this abatement, but he said that could be used for housing or municipals or sidewalks, those kinds of projects that a developer or an individual might be needing a loan for.
Wonderful.
I'm going to include a link to that also with these other links. Though I'm left wondering about some specific things that I suppose lots of rural communities deal with, and that is that we have empty lots where blighted homes had been, and in some cases those empty houses sit with no occupants. Is there a program that helps address the situation around those kinds of blighted properties?
Yeah, I think that's something every community is experiencing in some aspect or a small portion of their community, right? Maybe it's just a small cul-de-sac or a street. Yeah, there's some programs on the state level, and there's some things that municipalities can do also. The Iowa Economic Development Authority has a grant assistant program for municipalities to address and help improve blighted neighborhoods. So that's something that can definitely be checked into. It's a partnership program between municipalities and the Iowa Economic Development Authority. And that's a really exciting direction that I see Iowa going, is public-private partnerships or partnerships between the state and municipalities. So that is something you will see a trend on in different programs. But the Community Development Block Grant program does have a blighted neighborhoods program.
Mm-hmm. Is that something the city council in a community would look into rather than the developer necessarily, or who is it that really pursues those?
I believe it's the agreement ends up being directly between the Economic Development Authority on the state level and the municipality, but it really can be inspired and pursued by the developer themselves. And that's where I think a lot of things are best started is by the private sector and the individuals who want to help make it happen. So it can be inspired and the conversation can be started and the program can be looked into by developers. But it is something that the state and your local city would actually do the agreement, and then oftentimes the private developer is also brought into that agreement as a subrecipient.
Mm-hmm. All right, cool. What other kinds of programs are there for developers to kind of sell our community to somebody that would consider coming in and putting up some houses?
Yeah, so another one that cities and counties can take advantage of is something called tax increment financing. And in my world, we throw this acronym around called TIF, tax increment financing. Levi, I'm a pretty simple guy, so I like to break things down really simple. Essentially, it's almost the opposite of what property tax abatement is, right? So property tax abatement, as we talked about, is foregoing the property taxes for a period of time on the improvements that you make, the new construction. With tax increment financing, it's almost the opposite. So this is something, like I said, cities and counties can take the advantage of working with private developers for both commercial projects and residential projects. It's something that's been very successful in our community and in many communities across the state. So if you have a developer coming to your community and they need some assistance, either as an incentive or with infrastructure getting to the site that they want to look at or build on, such as roads, sewer, and water, things that, developers prefer not to pay for themselves, right? Things that the city or the county will own at the end of the day. Tax increment financing can help pay for that infrastructure. And essentially how it works in a very simple way is the new property taxes that are created from the new development will pay for the infrastructure that was put in that at the end of the day is owned by the city or the county, such as roads, sewer, and water. So that's always an area of how do we pay for those things. The developer essentially just wants to build the building, build the home, and either if they plan to rent it or sell it, that's their goal. They don't want to own roads and sewers at the end of the day. That's typically the responsibility, of course, of the municipality. So tax increment financing is a wonderful tool that takes the new property taxes created from the development, and for a certain period of time will pay for that infrastructure for the new infrastructure that the city and county will own. Then, after that debt is paid off for the roads and sewer, then the general tax base will expand. Those new taxes will just go into the general fund for the community.
Mm-hmm. I see. Well, I have to take a step back as I think of this program and these others that we've talked about, because I think if I were a builder, I would feel a little bit intimidated. You know, it's like these programs, it can be such a process. And what are the resources or avenues to really navigate the paperwork associated with these things, and seeing that, you know, all the I's are dotted and the T's are crossed?
Absolutely. So your local economic development director in your community is probably the best place to start. And Levi, I don't say that just because I'm in that role, but this is what economic developers are charged with, is to help with growth, whether it's commercial or residential growth or other community development projects. Your economic developer in your city or your county is going to be your best first stop, and probably your best long-term partner in the community to identify these different tools, and also to assist you with moving through the program. So I really appreciate you asking that question, because, you know, like you said, we're talking about all these programs, and there's a lot of them, and sometimes new programs pop up, and sometimes programs go away or graduate. So that's really an important point, is to get in touch with your economic development director. Sometimes that's somebody hired within the municipality, or that's a private nonprofit organization like I work for, that is community focused.
Well, in many small communities, these are volunteers that are maybe a retired person who has now decided to give back to the community. But I hear you saying that this is where Area 15, in my case, would come into play. These regional planning commissions, which have their 6 county areas throughout the state of Iowa. These are resources also?
Absolutely. So there are organizations in our different communities that are experts at grant writing and technical assistance, folks that really help you walk through the details. So these regional planning commissions, which are speckled throughout the state, they're nonprofit organizations. They assist with the navigation of many of the details of the grants. So they are great organizations to get in touch with.
Mm-hmm. So TIF is that acronym. Is this tax increment financing different than a workforce housing tax credit?
One of the really effective programs we have in Iowa right now for incentivizing housing development is a program called the Workforce Housing Tax Credit Program. And it is a tax credit program that helps lower the barrier to entry, or take out some of the risk associated with developing residential affordable homes in the state. It is a competitive program, and currently at this time, the application period for this program usually opens in the May-June window, and then the award period is usually in mid to late summer, and maybe even early fall, depending on the year. But currently, the Workforce Housing Tax Credit Program has 2 different tiers to it. If you are in a more of a metropolitan area of the state and have a higher population, the tax credits that a developer could receive are 10%. If you're in a more rural part of Iowa, the tax credits could be 20% of your project. And the program has become very favorable for rural Iowa because most of us are in lower concentrated areas in terms of population, so that 20% tax credit is quite attractive for developers. So I'm going to talk give a very simple example, and overly generalized, but if somebody was to want to put up a couple of duplexes, let's say, and those duplexes totaled a $500,000 project cost for the developer, they could potentially get $100,000 in tax credits from the state of Iowa for doing that project. There's a lot of qualifications. Not a lot. There's a couple of qualifications you have to meet. But that, if a developer could have that award prior to, or notice of that award prior to starting a project, that could really break down some of the barriers that a developer might have in terms of maybe concern if these homes will sell or if they will rent. So the goal of the program is to really break down one of the barriers to entry for developing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's easy to imagine with the high demand for housing, if a developer has a choice of building in Des Moines or Iowa City, why should they take the risk to come into a small community would be their question. And here we have the Workforce Housing Tax Credit Program, which is ammunition a small community could use to say, hey, you know what, this is the reason why, because you're going to do just as well or better with this investment in our small community.
Absolutely. And one of the things about this program that is unique is the tax credits are transferable. And so the value of that is not everybody could benefit from having a voucher from the state of Iowa that's worth $100,000 to pay your property tax or your income tax over a certain period of time. Not everybody maybe has that personal individual liability, tax liability to the state. So the tax credits that a developer could be awarded, that voucher, is transferable. So a lot of times developers prefer cash versus a tax credit. So if a developer was awarded, in this example, a $100,000 tax credit or a voucher, they could essentially take that voucher and sell it to somebody who could benefit from it. And they could sell it, for example, hypothetically for 90 cents on the dollar. So if a developer had this $100,000 voucher or tax credit, they could legally sell this tax credit for $90,000, turn it into cash themselves, and then it could benefit somebody who maybe could, use that $100,000 voucher. Does that make sense?
Yeah, so the Regional Planning Commission, again, would be kind of the resource to go learn more about such a program?
I think they may be able to help. Your local economic development director is going to be your best first start with this particular program, or your city administrator or your county executive. One of those three organizations would probably be the best first stop for the Workforce Housing Tax Credit Program.
Okay. The county supervisor is somebody that may be knowledgeable about economic development. Is that a typical scenario where that supervisor has a seat on the Regional Planning Commission? I'm just thinking, sometimes if we don't know who people are, then we're cold calling, that economic person in our community, and it's just that discomfort. But that's why I brought up the county supervisor.
Absolutely. So county supervisors, and I'm going to be bold here, county supervisors should be focused on economic development. And I say the same for city councils, right? They want our communities to grow, right? and how we grow is growing our population and growing the tax base. And hopefully by new development is the best way to grow your tax base. So your county supervisors are typically accessible and hopefully accessible. So they'd be a really good first stop too. And they should be focused on economic development, though a lot of times they have a lot on their plate also managing their other responsibilities or primary responsibilities of maintaining the roads and bridges in your community. So it might be a new conversation for them, but I would definitely guess they'd be very interested in any new development conversation.
Mm-hmm. All right. Wonderful. Well, shall we jump over to a different aspect? Childcare is something I want to make sure we get into. And then, there's the other features of community that make it beautiful and enjoyable in the trails and parks. So I want to be able to get into that too. But Josh, what's the childcare situation in Fairfield? I know that you have a vibrant rural community because you have a college there in Fairfield, and that changes the makeup of your community in ways that other rural communities maybe don't have such a population where they would have access to childcare. But what's the story there on childcare?
Well, I think childcare, especially currently, is getting the important attention it's needed in recent years. Right now we're starting to come out of the pandemic, and hopefully we'll get beyond this. But employers want to get their employees back to work, and the pandemic has had a real challenge on childcare centers, right? We all want to keep our children safe. And so some childcare centers have closed, which has put a real pinch on employers because if their employees don't have childcare, and they're not going to be able to come to work. So there's a lot of attention across the state of Iowa, and especially here in Southeast Iowa, being put on expanding childcare and making sure it's high quality and it's as affordable as possible. So in Fairfield, prior to the pandemic, we identified childcare as one of our top two needs. The other one was housing, which we just talked about. So we need more housing and we need more childcare in order to grow this community. And this was identified through all of our community partners and also the potential residents who would like to move here. We have points of contact and surveys that give us that information. So we've identified childcare as an economic development hurdle because we don't have enough, but we've really spun that and dug deep and honestly become an initial leader in the state in this community of turning that into an opportunity. So we have been working on a child care initiative here in Fairfield since about 2017 to address the three things that are really mentioned: expanding access, meaning creating more spaces; improving the quality, because parents, of course, want the best quality care for their children so they can feel comfortable and safe while they go to work; and then also addressing the affordability piece. Childcare typically is not a profitable business, especially in rural Iowa, but we, still need to cover the cost, whether it's a home-based provider or, center-based care. So we've been focusing on childcare, and we've had some great success. We've helped our current centers expand, the registered childcare centers in our community. We've helped them expand. We've partnered with state agencies and businesses to do that. And then we've also helped our home-based providers. We've helped those who are currently doing home-based care. We've helped them improve their quality with grants. And we've also helped those who want to start a home-based childcare business. We've helped them on every level with technical assistance, with grants. And again, we've partnered with, in our area, a state agency called Early Childhood Iowa. and they've been a great asset to helping us address the childcare issue here in Fairfield and Jefferson County, and we're having great success. And I should probably back up just for a second. I never thought that economic developers would be getting involved in childcare. You know, typically we focus on attracting businesses and helping our existing businesses expand, but really the shortage of childcare was and is an economic development issue and also opportunity for us that we're really excited about. So when we're involved in childcare, we have our set of glasses on purely through the lens of workforce attraction and retention, right? We want more people working in the available jobs here. We have so many jobs available, and we need to address the childcare shortage in order to be able to attract and retain workers and workforce to fill the jobs in our community. So that's why we're involved and why we've helped out our childcare centers and helped out our home-based providers. And the last piece of our initiative, and I don't know if it'll be the last, but it's the third prong of our three-prong approach, is we still need more childcare. We've added and retained 146 childcare spaces through the programs that we've been a part of and helped lead. But we still need more childcare. We're 588 spaces short in Jefferson County. So that's an incredible opportunity for us to grow. So the third prong of our approach is to add a new childcare center in addition to helping the centers and home-based providers expand. So we are going to be breaking ground here in March on a new childcare center that has been a public-private partnership. And the exciting piece of this is the state of Iowa and businesses in Fairfield have come together to build a new childcare center. It's really exciting to see employers participate in addressing the childcare issue, right? Because they want to attract and retain more workforce. So businesses in our community have invested in a capital campaign to build a new childcare center here in Fairfield that'll add 188 new spaces in addition to what we have. So we're really excited about that. It's been a few years in the making, and we were one of the first communities to get our businesses involved. And it's been an easy yes for them because they know it's been one of their biggest challenges to attracting and retaining workforce. So we're really excited to be breaking ground this month. It is March now.
Yeah, it is. Well, so early on in this conversation about childcare, we talked about the importance of assessing and how Fairfield took a look several years back at what the situation was in their community. Well, on your website, you've got a document called the Childcare Initiative Feasibility Study. Is the conclusion of that study was how Fairfield decided to say, okay, support existing facilities, prong one, right? And then support those home providers by incentivizing them to improve the services they're offering, and then adding these new facilities which fulfill the spaces that your community desires to have, the third prong. Our community in Kielda did an assessment in 2017, and what we found from that assessment was that people work outside the community, and since there's not childcare in the community, then they would take their kids to a neighboring city where it was closer to or on the way to where they work anyway. Then it leads to those children enrolling in kindergarten and so on. In those communities outside our district, we lose kids that open enroll once they get into the primary grades because they sort of get comfortable into that role of going to another district to get childcare. It all starts there, is what we found in our assessment. So I have been talking to some people about the endeavor to create childcare in a small community of 1,000 people. And I hear that it is challenging because you have to have the support that you mentioned with private industry, local governments, and nonprofits to fill in that full all the funding angles necessary.
Absolutely, and I'm really glad you made the point that every community is different. I think the one thing that I would agree on for all communities is to start with that assessment first. You can kind of do a survey that you create yourself in your community, or you can hire an organization to do a more expanded market study. But having data to make decisions, make data-driven decisions is going to give you your best foundation, and that's really what led our community, and I think what is the best guide to lead any community is to start with that market study, and also to understand, like you referenced, Levi, every community is different. You have a lot of outbound workforce, which provides its own challenges and opportunities for you to address childcare. So every community is different, and there's not one size fits all in terms of solutions to shortage of childcare or addressing quality or affordability issues.
Well, I want to end this childcare conversation, Josh, by pointing out a really interesting community that is spot on right between where you live and I live. Packwood is just the community that is a part of Richland, and it is halfway between Fairfield and Keota. The rural communities around the Packwood area have found a way to offer childcare in association with their elementary school. And so I know teachers that commute down there to teach at Pekin High School are able to take their young children to Packwood and they get childcare there. And it is an example of a very, very rural community that has pulled together the pieces to make childcare work. And so while I know there are challenges to work through, I think that it can be figured out. And part of that is kind of pulling together those initial pieces. Like I mentioned, our pool project, we had to get organized. And so we have those components now that will be easier to get the ball rolling towards these other things. And so I want to encourage people around Iowa to get this information to their city councils, tell them about this podcast, let them know that our rural communities have an opportunity to take those first steps. And whether it be housing or childcare or what we're going to talk about next with parks and trails, there's opportunities to get funding and to better our communities.
Absolutely. Childcare is a very passionate topic for many people. We're talking about our most precious assets, our children, in our communities. So, this can be really a big conversation in an important conversation. So there's some organizations that might be helpful to have an initial touch point. I love when the conversation starts grassroots, but there's a point where sometimes we need to bring in folks who are good facilitators of the conversation. And one of those, two of those organizations are First Children's Finance in Iowa. They're a nonprofit organization who I personally call experts in childcare knowledge. They're a nonprofit, and they provide a number of services to communities to help take a look at what is your childcare needs, and also once you have that data and that market study done, how can you move forward? And like I said, they're a great nonprofit organization. The other good organization to reach out to on the state level is the Iowa Women's Foundation. Currently, one of their primary initiatives is assisting with childcare in every community in Iowa. So they have some tools and resources also. So the Iowa Women's Foundation and First Children's Finance are both experts in this area, and will come to your community and meet you where you're at in the conversation at this point. So definitely take a look at them. And yeah, they're wonderful.
All right, I'll put links in the YouTube edition of this that take to those two resources. Well, the next topic today is to do with parks and trails and conservation. I like to think of these green spaces as such a really fun component of a community because everybody benefits, unlike building a house or a development where there's a specific set of investors or residents. Everybody benefits from the public projects. In my own community here, we have a bike trail project that was recently funded, and I'm going to summarize that because it'll help people just kind of understand some examples of what goes into a project such as a bike trail. We had a DNR, Department of Natural Resources, REAP grant, which was $75,000. That did not need to be matched. That 75 led us into fixing up our bike trail called the Key Wash Trailhead. And we also were able to organize as a community to get a Wellmark Kickstarter grant, which was $10,000, a Riverboat Foundation grant, which was $2,000. Now that Riverboat Foundation is associated with a casino in Washington County, and so they give grants to things throughout the region each year. Then we had an Alliant Energy Branching Out grant, which was in association with Trees Forever, and that was $1,000. And of course, our county conservation in Washington County is another aspect of funding. So they kicked in $1,000, which led to a nice sized project to create a trailhead for bicyclers right here on the east side of the Kiota community. So those things were things that we were able to get organized and take advantage of as a community to make that possible. The things that I mentioned there for the DNR and the REAP project, I want to say again that was a 100% source of funding that they did, and the deadline for those projects with REAP is August 15th, and the projects need to be related to parks or open spaces. If a community has like a sports complex or playgrounds, they would not be eligible for REAP money. So it's important that people understand when applying for DNR REAP projects that it does need to be those kinds of open spaces that they're trying to support. It's also based on population. So if a person has less than 1,000 people in their community, there's a $50,000 limit. If you have more than 1,000 residents in the community, there would be a $75,000 max on those REAP awards. Also, I mentioned the Wellmark Foundation. So those health and well-being grants can go towards things like parks and pools, and they have a deadline in mid-February. And those Wellmark Foundation grants are a 50-50 match. So a person could apply for $100,000 that would have to be matched by $100,000, and the matching part could be private or other nonprofits that then stepped in, as was the case. I mentioned 5 or 6 sources of funding that we took advantage of. We were trying to match the Wellmark part of that contribution with those other sources of funding. So that collaboration between multiple organizations makes it possible. Not to mention that with our trail, there was a farmer that we looked to donate money, or to donate the land that was needed to kind of expand that trailhead, and that was the Fagan family, which is a local farming family here, which made it possible to have the land to be able to do a trailhead. Also, the DOT, which is the Iowa Department of Transportation, has recreational trails programs. Those awards can be $200,000 to $300,000. They are a match which would be 20% to the 80% that the recreational trails program kicks in. A June and July deadline for a program like that. I'm going to put links to the DOT Iowa State Recreational Trails Program in the description with these other links. But there's also a federal version of that program which has the acronym TAP, Transportation Alternative Program. So it is likewise a $200 to $3,000 grant, which would require an 80-20 match. These are opportunities that happen each year with that DOT program, and they are, I learned that they are carried out by the regional planning commissions. They administer those grants. So that can be intimidating at first when a person thinks like, okay, so you apply for these grants and you get this funding and you're all organized, and now somebody's got to administer the money and do the accounting, and that can be that needs to be planned for. But that's where the regional planning commission can come in, is what I understand. Other examples, Josh, of support for trails that I learned about, I think are great to mention, because examples really help us see how businesses might fit in our community. Over in Oskaloosa, Musco Lighting is an organization, one of the larger businesses there, and they stepped in to help fund one of their trails around Oskaloosa. Another city over near to Fairfield is Albia, Iowa. A local option sales tax covered 100% of a trails project. So taxation is another way to look at covering costs when it comes to these kinds of community placemaking projects. I also learned that hotel and motel taxes or county foundations, I hope I remember to mention our Keokuk County Foundation, because they kicked in money for our pool project. I'll mention more about that pool project here in a moment. But Josh, I can't go without mentioning RC&Ds. There in Fairfield, you have Pathfinders RC&D. Could you say something about Pathfinders and what this organization can do for these kinds of projects?
Yeah, so Pathfinders RC&D, the RC&D stands for Resource Conservation and Development. I'll do my best to give a brief history, but really focus on where they are now. But they're nonprofit organizations in some communities in Iowa that were created in the late 70s to assist with some federal programs that had to do with resource conservation. And currently, they still do a lot of that work, help administer and facilitate some natural resource projects. But really what our Pathfinders Resource Conservation and Development here in Fairfield are really wonderful at is identifying grant opportunities and then writing grant applications and also administering those grants, right? You talked about sometimes it can be overwhelming about administering the funds and all the details that come with once you get the money, appropriately, accounting and keeping all the records. So Pathfinders is another great organization. In addition to Area 15 Regional Planning Commission, they're another great organization for writing grants. First of all, finding them, writing grants, and then administering them. They're very approachable and very successful in what they do. And these nonprofits like Regional Planning and Pathfinders Resource Conservation and Development, each situation is different. Sometimes there's a small fee up front to write grant applications, and in other cases, sometimes it's pro bono, meaning if you're awarded, then the organization will then charge their fee by administering that grant through the funds that you receive. Either way, the goal is usually to have a low barrier to entry. I shouldn't say the goal, but it's usually reasonable to have a low barrier to entry to get assistance with these grants.
That RC&D there in Fairfield called Pathfinders was useful in some projects I was associated with a number of years ago. Ragbri came through Fairfield and they did some projects to help promote aronia berries. There were some granola bars that were made by a local aronia berry farmer there in Fairfield, and I recall that they helped do a ragbri bicycle ride promotion of this local crop. And so learning of that, then ragbri came up north here a couple years after that, and I worked with Pathfinders then to also promote my aronia berry crop, and we had smoothies for bicyclers as they came through. Mentioning my aronia berry crop, which is part of my farm, I'll bring in another source of funding. So specialty crop block grants are available for farmers to do projects that promote what they're doing in niche agriculture, and I was able to access funds through specialty crop block grants with the USDA to do plantings in a public park. Those plantings were some niche fruits like pawpaw trees, persimmon trees, honeyberries or haskap, dwarf sour cherries, and aronia berries that we beautified a public park with. Then, when that grant ended, we applied for more specialty crop block grants to take the fruits that were being produced in that public park to local restaurants, and encouraging local restaurants to use these native and these indigenous fruits, which were growing in the public spaces, to add to recipes in their local foods menu. And so it was just really fun to work with an organization such as Iowa State Extension is another one, and Pathfinders to carry out those projects. And they were in the category of placemaking and community betterment. And I don't know, it's kind of endless, isn't it, Josh, when we start brainstorming up different angles to seek these kinds of opportunities.
Absolutely. And I think, Levi, I think what you and I would like to start to do in this podcast is to, let Southeast Iowa know there are resources out there. And I would say now more than ever, and there is hope for our rural communities. And I really think it best in terms of growth in the future, right? Because a lot of the communities in rural America are shrinking, but I do think there's going to be a turn towards growth of rural Iowa and rural America, and there are resources out there. And the best start, in my opinion, I don't know if you agree, but it's really grassroots, meaning those who are there, those who live there, those who work there every day, are really the best start to start with that vision and make it happen.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, awesome, Josh. Let me touch on a couple other aspects related to what people might do if they want to get organized to go do some of these kinds of placemaking projects. There are trade organization conferences such as the Iowa Bicycle Coalition, which has its annual conference in January. It's there that the ragbri route is announced each year, and they have sessions on planning, designing, and funding these kinds of trails and park projects. There's also the Iowa Heritage Foundation, which puts on an Iowa Trail Summit each year, sessions on walking, hiking, ATV trails, or water projects take place there. So people could brainstorm and learn about sources of funding at the Iowa Heritage Foundation or the Iowa Bicycle Coalition gatherings. The Iowa Economic Development Authority has programs that I can just rattle off here, Josh, what I learned in my research. I went to the website and there's a list of programs in the Rural Return Program, the Rural Innovation Grant, Rural Leadership Grant, Community Attraction Tourism Grants. This is daunting for a volunteer to say, oh, I'm going to go research some grants and write my community some grant projects. But if we think of the necessity of being organized and having an economic development coordinator such as you represent in Fairfield, Josh, these individuals can so quickly justify themselves in a small community. And do you have any suggestion on how citizens might approach their city council to say, listen, we believe that we could, as a community, fund a paid role for an economic person to go seek out these grants and administer them? What would you say, Josh?
That's a great question. I don't know if I've ever been in that position yet to, be working with a community that doesn't yet have one. Not to say that that's not common. I just haven't been in that position. But I think you made the point in case really up front is the economic case for it, the numbers, the return on investment. If a community was to make an investment of X amount to pay for that position, I think the accounting case, the numbers case in terms of return on investment could be pretty easy. How many businesses expanded, how many businesses came to your town and built new buildings, how many homes were built and expanded the tax base. And the thing about economic development is that's one way to look through the lens in terms of, the financial aspect. But the coordinating of all the community development projects really enhances the overall quality of life also. When we're looking at attracting and retaining residents to our town, those things need to be considered also, and they're oftentimes not easy to qualify or to quantify. When you add a pool to your community, which is an incredible asset, community leaders really need to take a look at, yes, we can't quantify that this pool, helped attract or retain 10 families, and we don't have testimonies, let's say, but really look at the bigger picture and look at the quality of life that it's adding and what it's going to do for your community in that example.
Mm-hmm. Getting organized, getting those private partners involved in the community. And once those pieces are in place, then it's almost like a cookie cutter scenario. One project after another could be pursued once those pieces are well organized in a community. So I think that in summary of what you just said, is a way a rural community could advocate for themselves and create these kinds of opportunities that we discussed today. Well, Josh, I'm going to wrap it up. We talked about housing, we talked about childcare, and we talked about parks and trails. In that, there were many resources. I will include links in the description where I post this on a YouTube channel. I use patreon.com to platform this material. It's a platform which allows me to put my podcast out there with additional resources that people can take advantage of and follow what I do. And so I look forward to sharing more through that format. And at the Leave Out Loud podcast, people who are out there interested in this topic, please spread the word and get this resource in the hands of your Iowa City Council, and then they can use these resources to help better your community wherever you are. Iowa has hundreds and hundreds, 1,000 communities that are just like the city of Kielder and Fairfield, and it's an opportunity right now to take advantage of this time to better our communities. So, Josh, at that, I'll give you any final words you have to say, and then we'll wrap things up. And I look forward to having more conversations with you in the future about how we can work together to get the message out there.
Well, thank you for this opportunity. I think it's an important conversation to talk about all the opportunity we have in Iowa, and especially Southeast Iowa. So thank you for putting this together, and looking forward to next conversations.
Very good. Have a wonderful week and a good spring.
You too. Take care.
Thanks, Josh.